I'm a prepper who survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion, and this is my story. Before I begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. It was 6:15 a.m. when it happened. I was already awake, checking my perimeter cameras from the comfort of my underground bunker's control room. Most people thought I was crazy for converting my entire life savings into this fortress 10 miles outside of Boulder, Colorado. The Doomsday Prepper, they called me. My own family stopped visiting years ago, unable to understand why I'd wasted my retirement on freeze-dried food, water filtration systems, and enough ammunition to supply a small militia. But I knew better. I'd been preparing for this day for over 15 years. I just never expected it would be aliens. The first sign came from my electromagnetic field detector. The readings spiked so high, I thought the system was malfunctioning. Then my radio scanner began picking up distress calls from commercial airline pilots reporting unidentified aerial phenomena moving at impossible speeds. I switched to the emergency broadcast frequencies and heard nothing but static. That's when I knew something was coming. I moved to the main surveillance monitors that gave me a 360-degree view of my property. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with dawn, but something wasn't right. The clouds were moving too fast, swirling in patterns that defied natural weather systems. Then I saw it, a dark shape, massive and silent, sliding across the purple-gray morning sky. It wasn't like the flying saucers for movies. This thing was organic-looking, like a massive airborne jellyfish with tendrils that reached toward the ground. Behind it came another, then another. Holy shit, I whispered to myself. All these years I'd prepared for economic collapse, nuclear war, climate catastrophe, even pandemic. But this? I reached for my satellite phone and called my daughter in Denver. The line was dead. Cell service too. I tried the emergency radio transmitter. Nothing but that same eerie static. I'd always told myself that when the end came, I'd be ready. Now I wasn't so sure. The proximity alarm jarred me from my thoughts. Something had breached my outer perimeter. I grabbed my AR-15 from the wall rack and checked the magazine. Fully loaded. I slipped on my tactical vest, complete with extra ammo, first aid kit, and comm gear that would probably be useless now. Force of habit. The secondary monitors showed movement at the fence line. It wasn't human. The thing stood about 4 feet tall, with a body structure that reminded me of a praying mantis, but with an additional pair of limbs and an elongated head. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shimmer and shift colors as it moved, a natural camouflage that would have made it nearly invisible in the wild. But my thermal cameras picked it up clear as day. It was examining my fence, those extra limbs manipulating something that looked technological. It wasn't alone. 3 more creatures identical to it emerged from the tree line, each carrying similar devices. They were methodical, moving in a coordinated pattern that suggested military training or at least tactical intelligence. These weren't mindless creatures. They were soldiers. I flipped the switch to activate my perimeter defenses. I'd installed them to deter human intruders, but they would have to do. The motion-activated floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the creatures in harsh white light. They reacted immediately, their bodies tensing and heads swiveling toward the source of the light. The sound system I'd installed began blaring at 120 decibels, a mixture of sirens and discordant tones designed to disorient and repel. It worked, but not in the way I'd hoped. The aliens retreated, but not in panic. They fell back in formation, maintaining their spacing, communicating with gestures that seemed too deliberate to be random. They were regrouping, not fleeing. I needed more information. I switched to the long-range cameras that gave me a view of Boulder. What I saw made my blood run cold. Multiple craft, similar to the ones I'd seen flying overhead, now hovered over the city. Smaller objects, drop ships maybe, were descending toward the streets. Even from this distance, I could see flashes of light that might have been weapons fire. The invasion wasn't coming. It was already here. The decision to bug in rather than bug out had been made for me. My bunker was stocked for a 3-year stay if necessary, with renewable power from solar panels and a wind turbine. both feeding into a battery bank that could last months without recharging. I had my own well, multiple filtration systems, and enough food to outlast whatever was happening up there. But I hadn't counted on the enemy being able to detect the electromagnetic signature of my setup. That's when I realized my mistake. The solar array was a dead giveaway. From above, it would stand out like a neon sign announcing human technology here. I needed to power down non-essential systems and rely on the backup generators buried deeper underground. Those, at least, were shielded against EMP and, hopefully, whatever detection methods these creatures had. I was reaching for the master control panel when the bunker shook. Not like an earthquake, more like something massive had landed nearby. The monitors showed it immediately. One of the smaller craft had touched down at the edge of my property. It was oblong, maybe 30 feet long, with the same organic yet mechanical appearance as the creatures themselves. A section of its hull began to iris open, and more of the aliens emerged. A lot more. Shit. I cycled through the cameras frantically. They were deploying in a standard search pattern, just like human military would. Each carried what I assumed were weapons, sleek, chitinous objects that appeared to be extensions of their bodies rather than manufactured tools. They moved with purpose toward my bunker entrance, which was disguised as a storm cellar behind my modest above-ground cabin. I had minutes, maybe seconds, to make a decision. The bunker was designed to withstand almost anything, but I hadn't planned for extraterrestrial technology. If they wanted in badly enough, they'd find a way. And I'd be trapped. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I rapidly cycled through emergency protocols in my mind. Protocol 7. That was it. I entered the command sequence into the control panel. Emergency lockdown initiated. All entrances sealed with reinforced blast doors. Ventilation switched to closed-loop system with carbon scrubbers. Power diverted to essential systems only. The bunker went dark for 3 seconds before the red emergency lights kicked in. Through the monitors, I watched the aliens approach my cabin. They didn't bother with the door. One of them pointed its weapon, and a section of the wall simply disintegrated. They moved inside methodically, sweeping each room with their weapons. They were looking for something. Looking for me. I held my breath as they discovered the hidden entrance to the bunker. One of them examined the heavy steel doors, running its appendages over the surface in a way that seemed almost curious. Then it attached something to the door. I expected an explosion, but instead, the device began to glow with an eerie blue light. The metal around it started to bubble and run like wax under a flame. They were cutting through. 15 years of preparation, and I was about to be undone in 15 minutes. But I wasn't out of options yet. I'd built this place with multiple redundancies, including an emergency escape tunnel that led to a hidden exit half a mile away. It was time to bug out after all. I grabbed my pre-packed go bag, which contained essentials for 3 days of survival. Water purification tablets, energy bars, first aid supplies, ammunition, fire starters, and a small toolkit. I slung my rifle over my shoulder, holstered my sidearm, and stuffed additional magazines into my vest pockets. The weight was substantial, but I trained with it. In the dim red light, I moved to the far wall of the bunker and activated the hidden door mechanism. A section of the concrete slid aside, revealing a narrow passage barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. The escape tunnel was my last resort. It was uncomfortable by design. Tight spaces deterred pursuit. As I pulled myself into passage, I could hear the alien's cutting device working through the bunker door. I didn't have much time. The tunnel was about 3 feet in diameter, lined with corrugated metal to prevent collapse. I crawled as fast as I could, the weight of my gear making every movement arduous. The red emergency lighting extended into the tunnel for the first 100 feet. Then gave way to darkness. I switched on my headlamp, its beam illuminating the claustrophobic space ahead. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, my joints screaming in protest, I reached the midpoint of the tunnel, where I'd installed a small monitoring station. From here, I could access the bunker's security cameras remotely. I needed to know if the aliens had breached the main door yet. The small screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the bunker from multiple angles. The aliens had indeed cut through the main door and were now methodically searching each room. Their movements were precise, efficient. They examined my equipment with what looked like recognition. They understood human technology. That wasn't good. I watched as one of them discovered the open escape tunnel entrance. It gestured to the others, and two of them immediately moved toward it. They were coming after me. No time to rest. I continued crawling, faster now, driven by a surge of adrenaline. The tunnel began to slope upward, and I knew I was nearing the exit. Just a few hundred more feet. My muscles burned, but I pushed through the pain. The sound of my own labored breathing filled the narrow space. Finally, I reached the exit hatch. It was designed to look like a natural rock formation from the outside, complete with local plants growing around it to maintain the camouflage. I pressed my ear against the hatch, listening for any signs of movement outside. Nothing. I slowly turned the manual release wheel and pushed the hatch open just enough to peer out. The exit was located in a small ravine, hidden from aerial view by the surrounding trees. The morning sun was now fully up, casting long shadows through the forest. I couldn't see any alien craft from this position, but that didn't mean they weren't there. I scanned the area as best I could through the limited opening before pushing the hatch fully open and climbing out. The fresh air hit my lungs like a blessing after the stale confines of the tunnel. I closed the hatch behind me, making sure it was properly concealed again. According to my calculations, I had maybe a 10-minute head start on the aliens in the tunnel. I needed to put as much distance between us as possible. I checked my compass and oriented myself. The nearest human settlement was a small cluster of remote cabins about 5 miles northwest of my position. Under normal circumstances, I would avoid other people during a crisis, but I needed information. How widespread was the invasion? Was it global? Were there safe zones? Military resistance? As I moved through the forest, staying low and using the trees for cover, I tried to process what was happening. Aliens. Actual extraterrestrials. It seemed absurd even as I fled from them. Part of me wanted to laugh at the cosmic joke, all my preparations, all my scenarios, and I'd never once seriously considered this. But there was nothing funny about the methodical way they'd searched my bunker or the ease with which they'd cut through hardened steel. After about 20 minutes of steady movement, I reached a small ridge that gave me a better view of the surrounding area. What I saw made me drop to my stomach immediately. One of the larger alien craft was hovering above Boulder, which was partially obscured by smoke rising from multiple locations throughout the city. Smaller craft buzzed around it like insects around a hive. Even from this distance, I could see flashes of light that had to be weapons fire. I pulled out my binoculars for a closer look. The destruction was systematic. The aliens seemed to be targeting infrastructure, power plants, water treatment facilities, communications towers. They weren't just attacking. They were dismantling society's support systems. Movement in the forest below caught my attention. I adjusted my binoculars and saw a group of people, civilians by the look of them, fleeing along a dirt road. Behind them, 3 of the alien soldiers pursued at a measured pace, not running, but moving with a steady determination that suggested they knew their prey had nowhere to escape to. I had a clear shot for my position. The ethical calculation took about half a second. I unslung my rifle, flipped up the scope caps, and settled into a firing position. The range was considerable, about 600 yards, but I'd practiced at this distance countless times. I regulated my breathing, feeling my heartbeat slow as I focused. The first alien dropped before the sound of the shot even reached them. The second swiveled its elongated head in my direction with unnerving speed, just as my second round found its mark. The third fired its weapon toward my position, but at that range, whatever energy it projected dissipated before reaching me. My third shot caught it in what I assumed was the center mass. The civilians below looked around in confusion before continuing their flight, now free of immediate pursuit. I didn't have the luxury of feeling good about saving them. I just revealed my position. I needed to move. I scrambled down the far side of the ridge, keeping to the densest part of the forest. The ground suddenly vibrated beneath my feet, and a shadow passed overhead. One of the smaller alien craft was sweeping the area. They'd triangulated my position from the shots. I dropped to the ground and rolled under a fallen tree, pulling branches and leaves over my body. Through gaps in the foliage, I watched the craft make another pass. It was moving slowly, methodically. Something extended from its underside, a sensor array, maybe sweeping back and forth. I held my breath as it passed directly overhead, certain that whatever technology they possessed would detect me through my primitive camouflage. The craft continued on, moving in an expanding spiral pattern away from where I'd fired from. They were hunting me, but they hadn't found me yet. I waited until it was out of sight before moving again, more carefully now, staying under the tree canopy whenever possible. By noon, I'd covered about 3 miles, moving in a zigzag pattern to throw off pursuit. The sounds of the invasion grew more distant behind me, which I took as a good sign. I paused to check my satellite phone again, more out of habit than hope. Still nothing. I'd heard no human radio transmissions either. It was as if the entire communications infrastructure had been systematically eliminated. I needed to conserve energy, so I found a defensible position, a small depression beneath a rocky overhang that gave me good sight lines in 3 directions while covering my back. I ate one of my energy bars and took careful sips from my canteen. The protein and carbs helped clear my head. So far, I'd observed several things about the aliens. They were methodical and tactical, suggesting military training or programming. They seemed to have specific targets, infrastructure, and technology. They could detect electromagnetic signatures, but weren't infallible. Their weapons were advanced, but had limited range. They could be killed. That last point was crucial. They weren't invincible, which meant humanity had a chance, slim as it might be. As I sat contemplating my next move, a new sound reached me, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors. I looked up through gaps in the tree canopy, but couldn't spot the aircraft. The sound grew louder, then suddenly changed pitch. There was a flash of light beyond the next ridge, followed by a concussive boom that I felt in my chest. The helicopter had been shot down. I shouldered my pack and moved toward the crash site. It was risky, but a military helicopter meant human resistance, and I needed to know if organized opposition existed. As I crested the ridge, I saw the wreckage in a small clearing below. The helicopter, a military Black Hawk from what I could tell, was in pieces, with the main fuselage relatively intact but burning. No signs of movement around it. I scanned the area carefully before making my approach, moving from tree to tree, using cover effectively. When I was within 50 yards, I heard it, a human voice calling for help. Someone had survived. I approached the wreckage cautiously, rifle at the ready. The heat from the burning engine section was intense. I circled around to the passenger compartment and saw him, a soldier, his uniform identifying him as Army, pinned under a section of the helicopter's frame. He was conscious, but clearly in pain. "Hold on," I called out, checking one more time for any signs of the aliens before breaking cover. The soldier's eyes widened as I approached. "Civilian," he managed through gritted teeth. "Something like that," I replied, assessing his situation. The metal frame had him pinned across the legs, but I didn't see any blood pooling beneath him. "That was good. I'm going to try to lift this enough for you to pull free." He nodded, preparing himself. I set my rifle down within reach and got my hands under the metal frame. It was heavy, but adrenaline is a hell of a thing. I lifted with everything I had, muscles screaming in protest. The soldier dragged himself backward, inch by painful inch, until he was clear. "Thanks," he gasped, his face pale with pain. "Sergeant Reyes, 10th Special Forces." "James," I replied simply. "Can you move? We need to get clear of this area. The smoke will draw them." He repeated, his expression grim. "So you've seen them too. They hit my place this morning. Been on the run since. What's the military response looking like?" Reyes shook his head. "Scattered. They hit us with some kind of EMP first, fried a lot of our communications. Command structures in chaos. Last I heard, they were trying to establish a defensive perimeter around Colorado Springs, but he gestured at the burning helicopter. Obviously not going well. I helped him to his feet. He winced but could stand. His right leg was clearly injured, but not broken. Were you alone? I asked, scanning the wreckage for other survivors. No, he said grimly. We were a 4-man recon team. The others didn't make it. I nodded, not pressing further. We need to move. Can you walk? I'll manage. I retrieved my rifle and helped support him as we moved away from the crash site, heading deeper into the forest. Reyes was moving slowly but steadily, clearly trained to push through pain. What were you reconning? I asked once we'd put some distance between us and the wreckage. Their ground forces. Command wanted intel on their tactics, weaknesses. We observed a group of them dismantling a power station. He paused, catching his breath. They're not just destroying infrastructure. They're harvesting it, taking components, materials. They know exactly what they're looking for. That confirmed my earlier observations. They hit my bunker the same way. Targeted search, like they knew what human technology looked like and how it worked. Bunker. Reyes gave me a sidelong look. You one of those preppers? One of those preppers who saved your ass, I reminded him. He managed a pained smile. Fair enough. And I'm grateful. We continued in silence for a while, moving as quietly as possible given Reyes's injury. I was heading generally northwest, still aiming for those remote cabins, but now with a new purpose. Getting Reyes to safety and potentially linking up with whatever remained of the military response. They've been watching us, Reyes said suddenly. That's the working theory at command. Studying us, learning about our technology, our infrastructure. This isn't a blind invasion. It's calculated. The thought sent a chill through me. How long had they been observing? Years? Decades? Had they seen us develop nuclear weapons, the internet, artificial intelligence? Had they decided we'd reached a point where we needed to be dealt with? Your CO think we have a chance? I asked. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. She said something interesting before we deployed. Said that throughout history, technologically superior forces have been defeated by less advanced opponents who understood the terrain and were willing to adapt. Vietnamese farmers, Afghan shepherds. History's full of examples. I nodded, understanding the implication. We were now the technologically inferior force, fighting on our home turf against an invader who, despite their advantages, might not understand the full complexity of what they were dealing with. It wasn't much hope, but it was something. Around mid-afternoon, we reached a small stream. The water was clear, coming down from the mountains, likely safe to drink. We refilled our canteens, and I helped Reyes tend his leg. The bruising was extensive, but the skin wasn't broken. He'd be able to keep going. As we rested, I heard something that made me freeze. Voices. Human voices. I signaled to Reyes, who immediately went silent, his hand moving to his sidearm. I crept forward, staying low, until I could make out the source. A group of civilians, maybe a dozen, were making their way along the stream about 100 yards downstream from us. They looked ragged, scared, some carrying makeshift weapons. A family group, from the look of it, with several children among them. We should approach carefully, I whispered to Reyes. They're scared and probably armed. He nodded. Let me do the talking. Uniform might help. We moved into view slowly, Reyes with his hands visible, calling out to announce our presence before we got too close. The group reacted with alarm at first, several adults raising their weapons, but relaxed somewhat at the sight of Reyes's uniform. U.S. Army, Reyes called out. We're not here to harm you. An older man stepped forward, a hunting rifle held loosely in his hands. You military boys know what the hell is going on. We've been on the run since they hit Parker this morning. Extraterrestrial invasion, Reyes said simply. Military response is being coordinated, but communications are down across most of the region. The man snorted. Tell us something we don't know. We were heading for the mountains. Figured they'd be focused on the cities. Good instinct, I said. They seem to be targeting technology and infrastructure. Less of that up in the high country. The group regarded me suspiciously. Who's this? The older man asked Reyes. Civilian who saved my life, Reyes replied. And a man who knows these mountains. That seemed to satisfy them. The tension eased slightly, and they invited us to join them as they continued upstream. Safety in numbers, they reasoned. I wasn't so sure a larger group would be easier to spot, but Reyes needed the rest that a slower pace would provide. As we walked, I learned more about the group. They were largely extended family, plus a few neighbors, who'd fled together when the aliens began systematically moving through their suburb. According to them, the aliens were going house to house, removing certain items, computers, batteries, anything with rare earth elements, from what they could tell. They took my father, one young woman said quietly. He has a pacemaker. They scanned him with some device, then just took him, loaded him into one of their ships with others who had medical implants. The implications of that were disturbing. What did they want with humans who had electronic medical devices? Were they studying our biotechnology integration, harvesting components, or something worse? By evening, we'd reached a small hunting cabin that one of the men in the group owned. It was basic but solid, with propane for cooking and heating, no electricity to attract attention. We settled in for the night, establishing a watch rotation. I took first shift, sitting by the window that faced down the valley, my rifle across my knees. The night sky was clear, the stars unusually bright without light pollution from the cities. Among them, I could now make out strange moving lights, more alien craft, perhaps reinforcements arriving. How many of them were there? How widespread was the invasion? Without communications, we were isolated, fighting a war in the dark. Reyes joined me at the window, his leg propped up on a footstool. You're good at this, he observed. The situational awareness, the tactical movement, military background. I shook my head. Just prepared. Been expecting the end of the world for 15 years. Just got the cause wrong. He studied me for a moment. You know, when all this started, I thought of guys like you. The preppers, the survivalists. Thought maybe you'd be saying I told you so. No satisfaction in being right about the apocalypse, I replied. Especially when it comes in a form you never considered. Reyes nodded. What's your plan? After we get these people to safety? I'd been thinking about that since we'd found the group. Find more survivors. Establish communication if possible. Learn more about what we're facing and how to fight it. Resistance, Reyes said, nodding. That's what's forming now. Pockets of resistance. Military, civilians, doesn't matter anymore. We're all just humans fighting for survival. I thought about my bunker, all my carefully laid plans now in alien hands. 15 years of preparation rendered obsolete in a few hours. But perhaps not entirely useless. The skills I developed, the mindset of self-reliance and adaptability, those were still valuable. Perhaps more valuable than ever. First 12 hours, I mused, looking out at the night sky where alien craft now moved among the stars. Only the first 12 hours, and everything's changed. World ends every day for someone, Reyes replied philosophically. Today, it just happened to be everyone at once. Beyond the valley, in the direction of Denver, the horizon glowed with unnatural lights and distant fires. The invasion continued, spreading across what was once my world. But here, in this cabin, humans had gathered. We'd survived the first wave. We were already adapting, already planning. I checked my watch. It was just past 6:15 p.m. Exactly 12 hours since I'd first noticed the strange readings on my EMF detector. In those 12 hours, I'd lost my bunker, everything I'd spent years building. But I'd found something too. Purpose. Community. A different kind of preparation for a different kind of apocalypse. The aliens might have superior technology, but we had something they might not understand. The desperate, stubborn will to survive that humans have demonstrated throughout our violent history. We would adapt. We would learn their weaknesses. And we would fight back. I am a prepper who survived the apocalypse. But the real survival was just beginning.